Hi, I'm John Prendergast from the Enough Project, and thanks for being part of this book club. I was asked to try to answer a couple of questions because you guys are reading the Enough moment right now. And the first question is, where are we now? And I wrote that book in 2010, so 4 or 5 years have gone by since the writing, and many things have changed. And three main countries were focused on in that book: Sudan, Congo, and then, of course, the areas affected by the Lord's Resistance Army. So I'll give quick updates on each one of them. Sudan, of course, had an historic moment where the country split in two. South Sudan won its independence and held a vote. People voted almost 100% unanimously to have their own state. And 2011, the newest nation in the world was born. Sadly, 2 years later, the South Sudan, the new state, has collapsed into civil war on the basis of a number of different issues. Sudan also remains in conflict in Darfur, where the government in Sudan is using the same tactics it was using, which we wrote about, genocidal tactics against the people there. They're still doing that today. And they're using the same tactics in two places called the Nuba Mountains and Blue Nile. So Sudan and South Sudan both are racked by conflict and continue to be beset by dictatorship, by authoritarian governments, by greed-based atrocities and human rights violations. So Congo is a little bit of a different story in that the part of the country that is at war is the East, and since the book came out, there's been a movement, or there was a movement in Train that has succeeded in developing a piece of legislation in Congress that resulted in a law that forced companies that source their materials, their raw materials from Eastern Congo, to have to report on where those materials come from and whether or not they are causing conflict. So this has changed the situation on the ground dramatically. It's cut the sources of support for the armed groups quite substantially, and it has definitely led to the removal of some of the worst armed groups, particularly the M23 that had committed such atrocities in Eastern Congo. So there's some positives, though there still is conflict and crisis in Eastern Congo. You're starting to see incremental moves forward in that situation there. The third place, the areas of Central Africa that are affected by the Joseph Kony and the Lord's Resistance Army probably has seen the most dramatically positive forward movement. The core strength of the LRA has been eroded quite dramatically, and you have now a situation where the top leadership, except Joseph Kony, has all either been captured and sent to the International Criminal Court or has perished on the battlefield one way or another. And so the effort to try to shrink the areas that the LRA controls or that it's able to impact has been very successful, and it's shrunk the LRA fighters to a very small number, in the hundreds now, whereas it used to be thousands and thousands of these militia causing havoc all over Central Africa. So that's beginning to be a positive story. The people that were all displaced, the millions of people that were displaced in northern Uganda, are now back home, resettled in their own communities, and are farming and moving their areas forward in peace. So there's a lot of positives in that story. The second question that was asked to touch on for tonight's discussion is a tough one. It's how do you keep people interested in these kinds of issues? You know, these issues that are half a world away, that don't really impact our lives very directly in any particular way, or don't seem to. How do you keep people's interest? You know, and I think that the key to it, the root of it, is in storytelling. People read and they watch videos and they listen to podcasts and stories and go to speakers who can tell a good story, who can captivate someone's interest on the basis of what they can pull together, what they experience. And so I think that you have some very dramatic stories from these places that we're talking about in the book, in the Enough Moment. And Don Cheadle and I, the co-author, we traveled to many of these places collecting stories. To me, that's the best part of the book. It isn't us, it's the stories that are told by people in the book. And I think that's the key to keeping people fresh, is the facts. It's one thing to know the numbers and all that stuff, but that, I think, gets numbing after a while. It's sort of, we've heard it all before. But when you tell the story of a particular person on the ground, their success, what's happened to them, what challenges they're facing and how they've overcome them, people get a sense of, they can identify with another human being and their struggle and their journey. So I think that's the key, is to find those stories for any issue that you're working on and present them in a way, if possible, having the people who are being affected most present them directly, but if not, if they can't for whatever reason, then you retelling the stories that people are telling, or pointing to stories of people on the ground. We can get them now with the internet. There's so many ways of accessing these stories. So organizing the stories and then connecting those people's lives and their challenges to solutions. There really are answers to the problems of contemporary conflict. There are answers to the challenges of development. There are answers to the human rights abuses and the atrocities that are being committed. There are solutions out there. We've seen them happen. South Africa has changed. Mozambique used to be at war. It's at peace. All throughout West Africa, countries were in the Blood Diamonds Wars and are now at peace. You have one success story after another because there are ways to address these problems, and that's what the people of South Sudan and Congo and the areas impacted by the LRA are waiting for their turn. They would like to see the kind of solutions that have come to these other places come to their countries, and they are struggling to try to make that happen. So our role is to learn through the stories what people are doing on the ground to try to change the situation, and then see what we can do to help, to add our hands to the overall effort to try to bring about change. And I think that's what the book is really about, is that, in fact, these are not hopeless places. There is plenty of evidence, empirical evidence, that wars can end, that dictatorships can fall, and that countries that are in free fall economically can turn themselves around and post positive economic gains. I think that's happened all over Africa, those stories. We just don't hear about them because they're not in the news, because if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead. So we just have for those of us that are interested in these kinds of places, by learning a little bit more, scratching beneath the surface about what's happening, we can learn and see, in fact, there are solutions to these problems, and we can help, as individuals who care about this, working in communities, can help bring about, can help support the solutions that people are struggling for on the ground in Africa and anywhere, places where there are long-term difficulties. So I encourage you all to keep reading and keep learning and keep believing, in fact, in the truth, which is there are answers to the problems of the world, and the answers involve all of us collectively working together to make that impact and make that difference, make that change. Thank you.